Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. The title to today's program is Challenge to Evolution. And we have with us a world-class scholar who is to issue the challenge to evolution. Not only the challenge to the theory of evolution, is it religious, is it scientific? Not only the challenge to the theory, but he has issued a challenge in court to the world's leading evolutionary scholars, and let's see if any of those have responded. We have with us, my friend, I only met you today, but I feel like I've known you for a lifetime, Dr. Joseph Mastropaolo, PhD. It's a delight to have you on the program again.
I'm honored to be here, Dr. Baugh.
Well, this audience, this worldwide audience, needs the information that you have to give us today. As a publishing scholar, you have published in peer-reviewed scientific journals 22 different articles.
Correct.
You've actually produced a booklet, and I think our audience needs to know about this, a booklet detailing the information that you've been using on our programs. And if people will just call the Creation Evidence Museum, we'll get them in touch with you on getting that booklet. It is needed in the classroom, it's needed in the pulpit, it's needed in private study, and it's needed on this program.
Thank you very much for that reference.
You have been instrumental, in fact, the guiding scientific space scientist on some very interesting programs regarding kinesiology. Can you tell this audience, that's your specialty, but it goes beyond kinesiology to medicine, space science, to biomechanics. What is kinesiology?
It's the science of how we move. So it studies the bones, the articulations, the muscles, the ligaments, the tendons, all of those tissues, and how they also respond to mechanical stresses. And it also gets into the area of physiology, and that's what I also studied as a postdoctoral research fellow. And I went into aerospace physiology as well as aerospace medicine. I may not have told you, but I received a vice presidential citation while I was at McDonnell Douglas for aerospace medicine because I had innovated a stethoscope that would work in an aircraft for the evacuation of wounded soldiers.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And actually, this audience needs to know he is so proficient in his work. There was a world-class experiment regarding human-powered flight, powered just by the human physiology and physique. This was the scientist driving the program. I read about it. I watched newsreels on it. Little did I know that I would personally meet and become a friend of the man involved in it. Dr. Mastropaolo, you not only were able to analyze what was going on and help design the system for human endurance, you were able to predict within 2 minutes the threshold of endurance of the pilot doing the work. Tell us about that, please.
Well, it was a situation in which we had a very loose organization. That is to say, I could not give any directives to the pilot. And the number one pilot was a young individual. I was twice his age, and he didn't think that he should be taking orders from me.
Now, what was he piloting?
Well, he was piloting the first man-powered aircraft that won the first prize. And we were in England, and he was training on his racing bicycle in the English countryside in a sweatsuit, which meant that it was very cold, very windy, but in the aircraft, it was going to be the opposite kind of atmosphere. But he wouldn't listen to me. But I became the number 3 backup pilot and set a record in the way that I required him, or would have required him if I'd been able to give him orders.
Now, as the scientist, you wanted to step in and get involved because they weren't doing it exactly right.
And I had to do it with my own muscle power. And so I set a record for 30 minutes, which he broke. And then I set one for 60 minutes, which he broke. And then a 90-minute one, which he broke.
And you were twice his age.
Yes, and then I set one for 2 hours. and he broke that record, but then I came back using the theory and broke his record, which I shouldn't have been able to do at my age.
That's beautiful.
And we very rapidly after that, he didn't have time to try and break that record, and we flew right after that. And so that was perfect psychologically, because he knew that I had the record, that I was a backup pilot, and if he came down prematurely, he knew that he might not get a second chance.
Did he cross the channel?
He crossed the channel with great difficulty. Dr. McCready, who was head of the project, asked me, he said, Joseph, how long can he last? Because there will be headwinds coming off the coast of France. And I said, and I went back to my data, made the calculation, I said he can last 170 minutes. He landed in 169 minutes and fell out of the aircraft. Said he couldn't have gone another stroke.
I'm sure that's true. Oh, that's marvelous. Now, with this world-class scientist, let's see what brings him here. Dr. Mastropaolo, were you taught evolution? Have you been an evolutionist in the past?
When I started going to school, the thing that really excited me was science. I always wanted to be a scientist. And I was led to believe, once in school, that if I wanted to be a scientist, I had to be an evolutionist. There are no scientists that are not evolutionists. I'm sure you've heard that, canard.
Yes.
And so I heard that, and so I abandoned my faith, and I said, I want, above all, to be a scientist. I was young, I was foolish, but that's what I did. And I went along that way with my faith to one side and always troubled. Was it really true that faith and science are incompatible like that? Is it really necessary for me to abandon my faith in order to be a scientist? Always troubled by that. And when I finally found out, by applying the science that I had learned to this area of evolution, which I was never allowed to do in my schooling, and I found that it was a complete sham, I felt that that was the biggest betrayal of my life, but it got me right back to my faith because I tested Genesis with the same tools. And what I found was Genesis is completely scientifically tenable.
That is elegant, that is majestic. Now, not only did you challenge evolutionary theory, but now that you have found Genesis record, creation science to be totally scientifically tenable, I understand that you've made challenges to the academic community, to the leading evolutionary scholars of our generation.
Dr. Baugh, what my research said was that all of evolution is built upon frauds and forgeries, and as such must be considered anti-science because it is trying to drive us back into ancient Greek times
and mythology.
With vitalism, superstitious religions, or the things that were supposed to take the place of religions. And that was, as far as I could tell, anti-science.
Yes.
It was driving in the opposite direction of science. Louis Pasteur, for example, discovered about germs and germ theory. Now, the archetype scientist was the physician who took that information, sterilized for germs, and prevented lots of infections.
Yes.
And that is what scientists are meant to do. They are meant to take scientific advancement and relieve human suffering with it.
Yes.
But evolution is doing just the opposite. So that's why I've called it anti-science, anti-biology. And
in court, you have actually challenged the evolutionary leaders.
And when I found that this was based on such a fraud and forged foundation, I said, this is a scandal. It's a travesty. Now be sure. And the way that I decided to make sure was to challenge the leading evolutionists in the world. And so I said, come contend with me. I believe evolution is a religion, not science. And let us contend in court. And I will contend that it's not evolution, it's devolution that is the law of the universe. And if you want, I will defend creation. And I couldn't get one of them.
How many have you challenged?
Challenged 45.
And among those, some names we would recognize as being leaders?
I think you would recognize Michael Shermer. I think you would recognize Richard Dawkins.
Oh, yes.
You would recognize Eugenie Scott,
yes,
who's head of the National Center for Science Education. I think you'd recognize Ernst Mayr.
Oh, yes.
And there are a number of others.
Yeah, but none of them responded. Now, let's offer this challenge to this audience. Let's expose the fallacies and the fraud of evolutionary theory. Would you lead us, please?
Yes. I would like to show you an analysis that was done to find the reliability of the old Earth idea. So there were three methods that were analyzed. The historical method came from records, old records like the rabbinical chronicles and so on.
Beautiful.
And what it said was the interval, using this interval method for determining reliability, it showed that it would give something in between 5,100 and 8,500 years as that confidence interval.
Yes.
And since there's nothing historically that would contradict that, we would, as scientists, be obliged to accept it. But when we analyze the 19th century ones, what we find is that confidence interval goes 1 million years into the future. So we can't, since the Earth has been in existence for thousands of years, we can't accept that. Now, the 20th century indirect methods also were on radioisotopes. They not only show millions of years into the future, but nearly 1 billion years into the future, and we have to abandon that as well.
Totally untenable.
Untenable. The only one that's tenable are the scientific ones, and roughly an average of 6,800 plus or minus 850 years was the standard deviation. Now, we can go from reliability. Just on that basis, we would abandon the 19th century and the 20th century radioisotope methods, just on that. But we go further. Let's go to radioisotope ages of the Earth as they were published. They started publishing them in 1921 for the age of the Earth. And you can see the way that this graph goes. Roughly, as we go forward in time, we see that the Earth gets older. And so what we have in 1991 is an estimated age from radioisotopes of the Earth of 4.5 billion years, whereas in 1921, it was 1.5 billion years old.
And nothing changed except their...
And what this line shows is a regression line fitting all of these data points, and it shows a correlation that's quite high and a significant bias that could be wrong only one time in 1,000. So what it shows is radioisotopes are definitely biased. Now, if we want to believe that the Earth is old, I have some probabilities or some expedients for those people who cannot accept the idea that the Earth is young.
Okay.
And here's one of them. Here's one of them. If you want to believe that the Earth is old or is young or old, but in any case, if you're one of these old Earth people, this car, according to the published data, is 3 billion years old, according to the bias that we have, because it's a 1923 Ford, and at that time, the age of the Earth supposedly was 1.5 billion years, and now it's 4.5 billion. We subtract, we get a 3 billion year old.
That Model T is 3 billion years old, if that science is true. And that's not science, that's fraud. That's sheer speculation.
Well, it's definitely got something fundamentally wrong with it when people publish information like that. We can go further, and we can say that this individual
I think I recognize
you
that
recognize
individual.
that man? And who was born in the 1920s, you see, is also going to be 3 billion years old. The age of the Earth now, 4.5. The age of the Earth at his birth, 1.5. Age of this fossil, 3 billion years old.
You're looking magnificent for a man who is 3 billion years old. I want to point out to this audience that this information you're getting is available in a booklet published by this world-class scholar. Just contact Creation Evidence Museum. We'll get you in touch with him. Now, show us more of this vital information, please.
Well, here are rocks of known age. One rock was known to be 10 years old. The other rock was known to be 49 years old. And when they were sent in for radioisotope dating, this 10-year-old rock came out 1.16 million years old.
That's a non sequitur. That doesn't follow. Something's wrong.
And this rock came out 3.5 million years old. Now, we can make an equation, which is called a calibration equation. We can equate it so that the apparent age from the radioisotopes will equal the real age from the solar years that we have observed, and put in 4.5 billion years, which is the apparent age of the Earth according to these radioisotopes. And what we get out is an actual age of the Earth of 3,868 years. That, of course, is too young. It's too young.
Yes.
We know that there were things that happened on the Earth beyond older than that. Now, this one comes out even worse, 1,314 years old. Now, you can see that the unreliability, which we showed before, shows up even in the calibration. Because in science, we can accept a calibration that's within 1%, but surely not 66%. So this shows that these data have something fundamentally wrong with them.
And are actually anti-science.
Exactly. And if we apply this also to the dinosaurs, which supposedly were 65 million years old, we put that in the equation, they come out 65 years old. And here, 67 years old. So that's what I show in this next slide. If we use the calibrated equation for the dinosaurs, then they would be in New York City and elsewhere in 1935. And you understand that that would have caused quite a sensation.
Yes.
And it's not likely to be true.
That's correct.
And here I showed that if we use these calibrations for the age of the Earth, and we come up with 3,868 years, then that meant that the Egyptians built their pyramids in outer space 800 years before the Earth existed.
Yes.
So if people want to believe the old Earth, then they need to believe these two things as well.
Which are absolutely non-plausible. With your specialization, would you talk to us about this arousal of genetic reserves, the potential that's there? You see, the audience needs to understand, when we talk about evolution, we're talking about what's technically known as macroevolution. That is, one living system accumulating desirable traits and genetic information to produce a higher form of living system, which has never been observed, which is scientifically impossible, because as Dr. Mastropaolo will explain, I'm sure in a moment, there are special reserves to protect the genetic information already in place. But if we're talking about microevolution, that is variation within genetic boundaries, that is totally plausible. We get various expressions, but no additional new information. The information was already there. Dr. Mastropaolo, would you mention for a moment, I read in your work late last evening, I was so intrigued, and this audience needs to get a copy of the booklet you've published. I read in your work about the various enzymatic mechanisms in place to preserve the chromosomes and the genetic information. Would you address that for a moment?
Yes. We have observed down through history that from humans come human babies. There's been no exception to that.
No exceptions.
And that's what science is all about, observation.
Yes.
Now, biology will also tell us why that occurs that way. And what biology tells us is there is at least 130 genes that protect the integrity of the DNA, and if there are any mistakes, these genes will repair those mistakes.
Would you say that again? This audience
Yes.
needs to really comprehend that statement.
And as a matter of fact, I just went to an updated article on that. It's not 130 genes, it's 145 presently that are known. And these genes are continuously monitoring the integrity of the DNA, the inherited portion of our anatomy and physiology. They're continuously monitoring that and repairing any kinds of mistakes that are being made.
Seems to me like there was a master designer behind all of that. And is it not true that not only is everything in place, everything must be in place and functioning for any of it to function at all?
Dr. Baugh, I can't even begin to explain the amount of intelligence and engineering that has gone into the simplest life form.
Yes.
It is just beyond my comprehension to even contemplate it, even to try to understand what some of the engineering would have been required in order to make things work that well.
Yes.
It's just an incredible story. Something that, as I said, I felt that I had been betrayed because all of that had been censored from my educational experience.
But the master designer was there gently working with you all along. He is alive and well.
And I'm so grateful that I am where I am today.
And I'm pleased you're right here. Would you take a few moments and explain to us about this arousal of genetic reserves?
Yes, now that we have said that evolution is a myth, it's superstition, it doesn't exist, it's just the opposite of what the real world is like, then let us find out what the real biological world is all about. We have built into ourselves what I call arousal genetic reserves. They're not visible, but they, on a certain event, will become visible. So they're there as reserves. So, for example, we break a bone, and let's, in this case, a blood vessel, break a blood vessel, and we'll have a blood clot. Now, that clot wasn't there before. It only came into existence because the vessel was broken.
Beautiful.
Likewise, this bone, broken. And as soon as it's broken, bone cells will proliferate and mend the break. And as a matter of fact, we're at the point of the break, the mended portion will be stronger than any other part of the bone.
Well, Chevrolets can't do that. Cadillacs can't do that. Rolls-Royces can't do that.
This kind of engineering is just beyond human comprehension.
Yes.
And here we have, for the skin or some ligaments or tendons, if there's a break or a burn or an abrasion, a cut, that we have these fibroblastic proliferation that will come into being and make the mend.
Now, all of this information is available in the booklet that you wrote. I want to encourage this audience to get it. In these last moments, in the booklet, you talk about certain things that kick in, like at altitude.
Yes.
Would you tell us about that in a nutshell?
If we go to altitude, we'll begin to create in our circulatory system more red blood cells, and also 2,3-diphosphoglycerate, which wouldn't be present before our going to altitude. If we come back down from altitude, we will bring the blood red blood cell count back to what it was before, and the 2,3-diphosphoglycerate will disappear. So there again, we have an arousal genetic reserve. And I can't begin, even in the booklet, I haven't only scratched the surface about how many I can put my hands on, because the human physiology is loaded with these kinds of reserves, unmanifested, but upon the event, they come into play, and they permit us to not only survive, but to survive, if I may say so, magnificently.
Magnificently. I want to shake the hand of a scientist who was willing to embrace the truth wherever it led him, and it led you to the feet of Jesus Christ and back to the Bible.
Amen.
I commend you absolutely. Now, it isn't just enough to admire a great man, a great mind, a great purpose in the life of an individual. In the booklet I mentioned, he talks about all living systems, the basic design, yet each one is specific and unique. He talks about not only each leaf, even from the same bifurcate plan on a twig, having the same design, yet each being slightly variant, yet all within the genetic boundary. He talks about the uniqueness of the human being. You are one of a kind. I'm so glad that this friend, this brother, this scientist has embraced the truth and is willing to, before a global audience, state that truth. He's one of a kind, but you are one of a kind. Your Creator addressed human history for you. Wouldn't you let him just step into your heart and live? Would you pray this simple prayer? God's listening. You don't have to work up to it. God has met you. Just pray this simple prayer. Dear God, I need you. You designed me, but I fell into sin. I need you to cleanse my sin and to save my soul forever. Lord Jesus, right now, I open my heart to you. Come in right now. Live within me. I'll serve you with all my heart. I trust you did that. In fact, you performed a scientific experiment, and I trust that you have trusted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. Information like you've received today is available at the Creation Evidence Museum in printed form, in videos. We even have a coloring book for the kids. Just call or write us at Creation Evidence Museum, P.O. Box 309, Glen Rose, Texas 76043, area code 254-897-3200, or check us out on the web, creationevidence.org.